What is going on, Headliner Nation? I cannot believe it. Every single call we made last week was correct. Every decision you made with your lineup was correct. All of your studs went off. The guys on your bench did absolutely nothing, and we all have perfect records in fantasy. Oh my God. We are living in a nightmare, aren't we? Headliner Nation, I really wish the season was going exactly the way that Dream said it was, but unfortunately, we are not there, which means we have to keep working twice as hard to stay on top of everything going on in the NFL. So let's get today's running back video started, and we're going to take a look at the BRUNT Workhorse report and see which running backs are getting the most work right now in the NFL. Honestly, there hasn't been a whole lot of shuffling at the very top of this list. A lot of these guys continue to get tons of work over and over. It's guys at the bottom of the list that are kind of shuffling in and out. Like, for instance, a new addition to the list this week is Travion Henderson at number 24. With no Ramondre Stevens in the last couple of games, he's finally getting the type of workload that fantasy owners wanted when they drafted him earlier in the year. Will this continue? We'll talk about it during that segment. Jaylen Warren, he's banged up unfortunately, but he made his way into the top 24 as well. And a guy like Kenneth Walker, he continues to stay inside the top 24. Do you trust him moving forward? He gave us a touchdown finally last week, but is he a guy that we want to continue to play? And Tony Pollard, I honestly have no idea how Tony Pollard is still on this list, given the fact that Tennessee barely can find any chance to play ahead of their opponent. And just like a lot of these running backs are true workhorses for our fantasy lineups, BRUNT is high performance workwear for any job. All day comfort, heavy duty durability, and right now if you use code HEADLINERS at checkout, not only you're going to get $10 off of your order, but you have the ability to try any of their high performance workwear on the job risk free. They are made for any trade, so if you're looking for some new work gear, then BRUNT is exactly where you need to go. Thursday Night Football, we've got Buffalo and Houston, and for James Cook going up against Houston, it is a tough matchup. Houston is still allowing the 9th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, and he's only run for 101 yards over his last 2 games combined. So some of that upside really hasn't been there, and in this matchup, it may not be there as well. But we know Josh Allen is an MVP candidate once again and can move the football down the field. Let's just hope that Josh Allen doesn't steal 3 rushing touchdowns again this week. One more positive area to note about James Cook over his last 2 games, he does have 8 targets in the passing game, more than his last 5 games combined. Anybody that has Woody Marks on their team definitely feels this, and anybody that's been trying to start Woody Marks feels it even more. But what in the world is going on in Houston? Woody Marks looks like he is taking over as the RB1 with a ton of potential one week, and then the next week it's like there's no potential there whatsoever. And on Thursday Night Football going up against Buffalo, who currently allows the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing running backs, this would be the time for Woody Marks to finally have that breakout campaign. Last week, it wasn't terrible, but it definitely wasn't good. He had 44 rushing yards on 18 carries, averaged 2.4 yards per carry, and he only had 1 target in the passing game. We are patiently waiting on Woody Marks. If you have him, it may be best served to just continue to hold until you absolutely see it. But some of you out there, if you have Woody Marks and you don't have any other options, you may have to start him. It's a good matchup to do it. We just need to hope that he actually goes off. Jaylen Warren looked to be off to a great start last week, then unfortunately got injured, and it looks like he's going to be questionable heading into the game this week. So the question now becomes, do we play with Kenneth Gainwell, or do we wait to hear what happens with Jaylen Warren? With Kenneth Gainwell, if Jaylen Warren doesn't play, he's at least a fringe start. He had 8 targets last week, and with Mason Rudolph assumed to be starting this week, you gotta factor in that he's probably gonna be dumping it off to Gainwell quite a bit once again. And if that happens, Gainwell definitely has a ton of flexibility. And if you're in a PPR league and you play Kenneth Gainwell with no Jaylen Warren, he can end up being an easy RB2. If Jaylen Warren is healthy and does play, we'll put Jaylen Warren as a fringe start and Kenneth Gainwell will go to a sit. The Steelers are currently allowing the 8th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, but that doesn't mean they haven't given up some bigger performances here as of late. Recently, recently, the Steelers gave up 99 rushing yards to Chase Brown and 95 rushing yards to Kamani Vidal. But prior to those two performances, they held Jonathan Taylor to only 45 yards, and nobody's really been able to hold Jonathan Taylor in check this season. So what are we going to get from the Chicago Bears running backs this week? Swift clearly has the volume. Last week he had 21 carries to Kyle Monangai's 12 carries. Swift averaged 4.3 yards per carry, so clearly he was more efficient because Monangai only averaged 1.9. But Monangai scored the touchdown. In this matchup, to me, I think both of these guys are fringe start candidates. If you own DeAndre Swift, you're probably still going to play him. And he could run for a decent amount of yards, but if he doesn't find the end zone or if he doesn't do a whole lot in the passing game, he probably doesn't become a very high-end RB2. He's more of a low-end RB2 at best. For Kyle Monangai, you're only playing him if you're in absolute desperation mode and you don't have anybody in front of him that could get more volume. Because with Monangai, I could see him at 10 to 12 carries once again, but he's going to have to score a touchdown. The New England Patriots have a great matchup on the ground against the Cincinnati Bengals this week, but the true question becomes, if Ramondre Stevenson does return, do we still trust TreVeyon Henderson as a smash start? He's absolutely earned it, right? He's got 5 touchdowns over his last 2 games. He's got 4 games straight with 10 or more carries. So he's finally getting some volume. He's making the most out of that volume. Now, I would love to see his efficiency be a little bit higher. It hasn't been great over the last several games, but I can overlook that if you're scoring touchdowns. But with Ramondre Stevenson set to return to practice on Tuesday, it's really hard to tell exactly what New England's going to do. Could they still give TreVeyon Henderson 10 or more carries? Absolutely. But some carries are going to go back to Ramondre Stevenson. And if he gets any of those big carries inside the red zone, that is where TreVeyon Henderson loses a ton of value. Even though New England allows the second fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, Chase Brown has kind of made his way back to must-start territory. Now, don't mistake that for me saying that he's a must-start because he has high upside. He's a must-start because he's playing well enough, and with all the injuries and everything else going on, Chase Brown probably needs to be in your lineup. Over the last 5 games, Chase Brown has been a top 24 running back every single game. 2 games inside the top 8. He doesn't have the upside that he did last season, but with the exception of last week, this Cincinnati offense has played very, very well. And even when they had a down performance last week, Chase Brown still ran for almost 100 yards. He has a ceiling of an RB2, maybe even just an RB2 this week, but he's still in our lineup regardless. The backfield for the New York Giants is basically split in half, and now they get a Lions defense allowing the fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. When you take a look at the numbers from last week, Tyrone Tracy ran for 88 yards on 19 carries, and he played 51% of the snaps. Devin Singletary ran for 44 yards on 16 carries and played 49% of the snaps, but Devin Singletary had 2 touchdowns. Tyrone Tracy did add 4 targets in the passing game, so he could be the most useful running back out of this bunch going up against the Lions this week. But the Lions have only allowed a running back to run for over 80 yards twice this season. This should be a smash start for both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, and quite honestly, if you own Monty, you're probably going to play him this week, even if I have him listed as a fringe start. The New York Giants are allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to have top 5 potential this week, whether it be on the ground or in the passing game. It's tough watching David Montgomery be mostly fantasy irrelevant for several games now. 5 straight games outside the top 12, and he's only been inside the top 24 one time during that same span. So for David Montgomery, hopefully this is the week that they try to get him going a little bit, and if he does, scoring a touchdown is definitely the potential, and hopefully he adds a few big runs as well. But with a lot of positive game script on the horizon against the New York Giants, my hope is that David Montgomery gets more than just a few looks this week. Aaron Jones was the clear workhorse from Minnesota once again last week, running for 70 yards on 16 carries and adding 6 targets in the passing game as well. Jordan Mason didn't have a terrible day. He ran for a touchdown and 45 yards on 6 carries. But going up against Aaron Jones' old team, the Green Bay Packers, Aaron Jones' play style with his ability to work in the passing game is going to be much more effective than trying to run Jordan Mason at this line 6, 7, 8, maybe even 10 times in a game. I expect Aaron Jones to be startable this week, and Jordan Mason would absolutely have to find the end zone because I don't even anticipate a lot of volume. As of this recording, it does appear Josh Jacobs is set to miss some time. However, the Green Bay Packers have not officially ruled him out as of yet. I would anticipate Emmanuel Wilson being the guy this week for the Green Bay Packers going up against Minnesota, who currently allow the 10th fewest fantasy points per game. So Emmanuel Wilson's first opportunity to really take over in the backfield isn't going to be the best one. Wilson scored last week and he had 40 yards on 11 carries. This week, we're probably going to find some inefficiencies once again. Hopefully a big play or two, and hopefully Green Bay moves the ball well enough that they can get inside the red zone and get Emmanuel Wilson a couple of looks at the goal line. This is a nightmare scenario if you own both of the running backs for the Seattle Seahawks. Now, let me talk through for a second why both of them are listed as a fringe start, and why you don't necessarily need or should play both of them. Tennessee's allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game, so there is going to be an opportunity for some success on the ground with both of these running backs this week. Once again last week, it was nearly an even split. Kenneth Walker, 51% of the carries, Zach Charbonnet, 43% of the carries. Kenneth Walker, for the love of God, finally found the end zone. And once again, he looked like the more explosive back. Zach Charbonnet didn't look bad by any means, but Kenneth Walker, from an efficiency standpoint, has been much better than Charbonnet almost every single game this season. If you own both of these running backs, you're only going to play one, and it's Kenneth Walker. I'm choosing him this week for a couple of different reasons. Number one, hopefully last week is a sign of things to come, and Seattle is going to give him more of those opportunities moving forward. Listen, better late than never. If we've been waiting this long for it and he finally does it, if you make the fantasy playoffs and Kenneth Walker can give you RB2 performances the rest of the way, you're not going to hate him nearly as much as you have so far through the first 11 weeks of the season. Now, if you have both of these guys, I want to go with the one that has showed me the more big play potential all season long, and that's Kenneth Walker, not just on the ground, but in the passing game as well. Because in a matchup like this, going up against Tennessee, allowing a lot of fantasy points, I want to take the guy that has the opportunity to break the most big runs, and that is Kenneth Walker. Now, if you own either or, let's say you own just Kenneth Walker or you own just Zach Charbonnet, I think you can play both of them. Clearly, I've already explained why you can play Kenneth Walker, but for Zach Charbonnet, if you only own him, you might be in a position where you need to put somebody in your lineup. And I'll go with a running back in a solid matchup more times than going with, like, we'll talk about him in a few minutes, but like a Bam Knight. I would rather go with Zach Charbonnet than a Bam Knight this week because of the matchup, because we've seen touchdowns from him so far, and hopefully, just like I said with Kenneth Walker, he could break a big run or two and make a majority of his fantasy day, even if the touches are lower than Walker's. The Tennessee Titans don't play in enough positive game script to warrant putting Tony Pollard in your lineup. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I cannot believe that he is still in the top 24 of most touches this season among running backs. If he doesn't score a touchdown, he's not worth it. They're not moving the ball enough, they're not getting in the red zone enough, and they're not playing ahead enough to actually give Tony Pollard the type of touches needed to be fantasy viable. On the flip side of that, Tajay Spears, he hasn't been fantasy viable either. He's not even getting that many targets. The only reason I even considered putting him as a fringe start this week is because Calvin Ridley is now out for the season, and DK may end up missing this week because he's dealing with an injury as well. If those two pass catchers are out, maybe Tajay Spears can see 5 or 6 targets this week. Jonathan Taylor gets a very tough matchup this week. A few weeks back, he only ran for 45 yards against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and this matchup is more difficult than that one. Now, could Jonathan Taylor run for over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns? Absolutely he could. It wouldn't shock me. Nothing this season, I guess, seems to shock me. But it is a tough matchup. So if you're playing Jonathan Taylor this week, which if you own him, you're expecting a little bit of a lesser ceiling. But his 15 rushing touchdowns this season are more touchdowns combined than some other teams. The flashes that we saw from Brashard Smith that had everybody holding on to him for at least a couple of games have kind of dissipated at this point. Moving forward, Brashard Smith can probably find his way back to the waivers. As long as Kareem Hunt stays healthy, he's going to be the main guy. If you're playing Kareem Hunt, you're not playing him for the volume, though. You're playing him for the potential at a touchdown. He has touchdowns in 3 straight games now. And we know Kansas City can get inside the red zone. And when they do, Kareem Hunt has a great opportunity to find the end zone. Well, that was nice while it lasted. We got a couple of top 6 performances in back-to-back games from Breece Hall, and owners were breathing a little bit of relief, like, hey, maybe we're turning the corner and Breece Hall can be a guy for us the rest of the season. And then he was the RB33 this past week against the New England Patriots. This matchup against Baltimore is not nearly as good as what you may think it is, because Baltimore has played much better against the run as of recent. Over the last 4 weeks, they're allowing the 10th fewest fantasy points per game to the opposing running back position, and they've only allowed 214 rushing yards during that span as well. Breece Hall, for me, is another very volatile play. Could he be a top 6 running back again? Absolutely he could, but he could also be in the 30s too. Derrick Henry just is not showcasing the upside that we've become accustomed to for him, but that's okay because at least we're getting a steady floor now. Over the last 5 games, he's had at least 70 rushing yards in every game, and he's been inside the top 24 running backs each of those games as well. So is he giving you the upside you want? No, he's not. But as long as he can keep finding his way into the top 24 running backs, there's nothing to complain about there, because with the way this season has gone, top 24 performances are basically like gold at this point. Last Saturday, I put out our final trade target video of the season, and Quinshon Judkins was in that video. Now, if you traded for Judkins before he played on Sunday, you don't love what you saw, but I'm still going to stand by everything I said in that video. With how good his matchups are the rest of the season, Quinshon Judkins could be a very valuable member of our lineup on a way to a championship this season. Now, he did get 17 carries again last week, so he's getting 15 plus carries that we can really bank on every single week. His average per carry, though, has not been great. He has not been very efficient over the last several weeks, and some of that has to do with the play at the quarterback position. Has Dylan Gabriel been terrible? No. Has he been good? No, he hasn't been good. Kevin Stefanski has said that once he clears the concussion protocol, he will start once again. So right now, it seems like Shedeur Sanders will be the starter this week. If Gabriel ends up clearing, then Gabriel will start, and then maybe everything will end up being fine. But we need positive game script. That's what we need against Las Vegas this week. And if we get positive game script, we probably get a top 12 or at least top 15 performance from Judkins. I kindly ask that you provide me just a brief moment to stand up on my soapbox, because the Las Vegas Raiders on Monday night were exactly the epitome of what is wrong with the 2025 season. You're going up against the Dallas Cowboys, who have one of the worst defenses in all of football. You're also going up against the Dallas Cowboys, who have one of the best, most explosive offenses in all of football. So how do you combat that? How do you combat a really good, explosive offensive team that has a bad defense? You run the football. Now, I realize that Quinnen Williams being in the middle of that defense is definitely going to be a lot of help that they have not had this season. But it's one guy. You can game plan to run away from one guy. So what did Las Vegas decide to do on Monday night? They decided to drop back over 90% of their plays in the first half. That's right. 90% of the plays that they called in the first half, Geno Smith dropped back. Why? And it is exactly what makes this job so hard as well. Because we can spend all week looking up stats, diving into numbers, researching, finding trends, whatever it may be. And then on Monday Night Football, the Las Vegas Raiders decide to drop back 90% of the time. And I guarantee you, and I promise you, that if someone is telling you the truth, nobody knew that that was going to happen on Monday Night Football. Nobody. And if they say differently, I bet they're lying. With that being said, I don't know what Las Vegas plans to do against Cleveland this week. It is a tougher matchup. They allow the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. We've seen some running backs put up some decent yards against Cleveland, even if they don't end up scoring. But at this point with Ashton Genty, it would be really hard to put him inside the top 12. The Jacksonville backfield may be the most important backfield that we have to monitor this week. And it is all centered around Byshell Tuin because of what he did last week. He looks like he is on the rise. And even before the ankle injury last week, which we're still waiting to hear more about, he looked like he was getting ready to take Travis Etienne's job. He was more explosive, he looked better, he looked crisper in the run game, and we'll see what happens moving forward, but Bichelle Tuitt is the type of guy that could be a league winner down the stretch if Jacksonville really is going to turn to him. Now, as of this recording, Tuitt told reporters he was good to go, that his ankle was going to be fine and he'll be out there next week, but we've seen people say that all season long and then they don't end up playing. So this week against Arizona, if he doesn't play, Travis Etienne is a smash start. Even if he's not nearly as explosive as what Tuitt is, he's going to get more than enough volume with touchdown potential against Arizona, who allows the 9th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. If Tuitt does end up playing, both of these guys are fringe starts. I'm going to be cautious with Tuitt. I'm not going to play him over guys who I know are going to give me solid volume, because even if he does play, we don't know if he'll end up being limited. Again, the ankle injury, he may not say it's serious, but that doesn't mean that come game time that he's not going to be able to go out there and put up 10 to 15 carries. Now, some of the carries last week, who knows, maybe because game script, maybe it's because Tuitt is actually taking over this backfield. But this is going to be one that we have to closely monitor. Because of all the guys that we could pick up off waiver wire, Tuitt might be the guy that is the league winner this season. Arizona's matchup, not as friendly. Jacksonville allows the 6th fewest fantasy points per game, and it sounds like Emari Demercado will end up missing this week. A high ankle sprain as of right now. Adam Schefter reported this morning that it doesn't look good for him to play this week. I'm listing him as out, even though he's not officially out yet, because everything I have read basically says he's not going to be good to go this week. So it's going to be Bam Knight and Michael Carter. Still really no word on Trey Benson, no update on when he could end up returning. So Bam Knight this week, I know he had the touchdown last week, and I think people are going to kind of think, hey, let's go with him again, but it's a tougher matchup on the ground. If I had to guess, Michael Carter would be the way to go, because we would want to chase targets with Michael Carter in this game, especially if Marvin Harrison Jr. has to miss again. Michael Carter had 7 targets last week. If there's no Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously Michael Wilson and Trey McBride will be the 1 and 2. But if they're having trouble moving the football on the ground with Bam Knight and just traditional run game, then Michael Carter could see a decent amount of targets once again. But I don't even think I want to chase that. After Dallas decided to trade for a good defensive player and add Quinnen Williams to their defensive line, they're going to be harder to run on the rest of the season. Now, is it going to be impossible? Absolutely not. I can't believe I'm even saying these numbers. After holding Ashton Jeanty to 7 yards on 6 carries on Monday Night Football, they still allow the 3rd most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. So if teams can get outside of Quinnen Williams, they're still going to find success. And Saquon Barkley could get outside of Quinnen Williams and find success this week. But should he be a start? Probably not. He should be a fringe start. When you take a look at the numbers, he doesn't deserve to be listed in green at all. Since week 5, he's been inside the top 12 running backs 1 time. More realistically, he's a running back 2 right now. But if you own him, you spend a top 3 pick on him, and you absolutely have to play him. And you've got to hope that he finds some upside this week, because it's going to be absolutely necessary for those of you that own him in the fantasy playoffs that he starts to show a little bit more upside. Javonte Williams is still running the ball well. He's putting up respectable numbers. He's getting a decent amount of volume. And even though he hasn't had great weeks the last couple of weeks, he just hasn't scored a touchdown, which he was doing a lot to begin the season. Hopefully this week, Dallas can move the ball against Philadelphia, get into the red zone, and have Javonte Williams actually find the end zone once again. For me this week, if he scores a touchdown, his ceiling is probably just inside the top 12. But I think it's more reasonable to expect Javonte Williams giving us a floor as an RB2 this week. For the Atlanta Falcons, I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about Bijan Robinson. If you own him, you play him. If he gets the volume, you know he has the upside, as long as Atlanta sticks with him in the game plan. A majority of you are probably wondering about Tyler Algier. Can you use him as a fill-in this week? With all the injuries, is he a guy that we can put in our lineup? And you're looking at the touchdowns and you're thinking to yourself, well, he scored 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games, and he has 4 touchdowns in the last 4 games. So obviously he's getting opportunities, and he is. But over the last 6 games, he only has 2 games where he has double-digit carries. So could Tyler Algier be a fringe start? Yeah, he could be a fringe start. But I'm not going to really rely on just the touchdowns from a backup running back to go into my fantasy lineup. Would I play him over guys like Bam Knight? Yes. Would I play him over Jordan Mason? Probably in his matchup this week. And there's probably even a couple of other guys that I would also play Tyler Algier over. But for a blanket statement, no, he's not a fringe start for me because we're not even getting close to double-digit carries a majority of the time. Alvin Kamara's success this week is all predicated on which defense decides to show up for the Atlanta Falcons. Is it the defense at the start of the season that looked like it could stop everybody and kept Buffalo in their place? Or is it the defense that hasn't been able to do anything really over the last several games and cannot stop the run? Because now they allow the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. Alvin Kamara is the sole guy in this backfield. Prior to the bye week, Alvin Kamara got all of the touches. Devin Neal and Taysom Hill combined for under 10 touches in that game. So if you're looking for someone in the backfield, it's absolutely Alvin Kamara, and there's not a whole lot of competition for him. Tampa Bay and the LA Rams could end up being a really fun game for Sunday Night Football. But fun for us to watch, not necessarily for the running game. Bucky Irving returned to practice last week, and he didn't play, but I would have to bet that Bucky Irving is probably at least another week away from playing. Bringing him back against the LA Rams just doesn't seem like the best opportunity for Bucky Irving to come back and be successful. Right now, the LA Rams are allowing the 2nd fewest fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. So if we take Bucky Irving out of the equation for one more week, you're probably thinking, hey, Sean Tucker with 3 touchdowns last week? Absolutely, we should be rolling with him. Not so fast, my friends. This is a really tough matchup, and Sean Tucker is not going to have the explosive plays that we saw last week. Could he score a touchdown? Absolutely. Will he have more volume than Rachaad White? I believe that he will. Rachaad White is probably going to get some work in the passing game this week, given how tough the matchup is. And if for some reason they cannot move the ball on the ground, Rachaad White should end up seeing probably 5 targets in this game. But Sean Tucker, to me, is very touchdown dependent, and for as good as he looked last week, I am not banking on him looking anywhere close to that this week. The numbers recently for Kyren Williams look great. He has a touchdown in each of his last 3 games. He has 4 total touchdowns during that 3-game span. He has 5 touchdowns in his last 5 games, and he's been a top 13 back in 5 of his last 6 games. Finally showing a little bit of upside that we really needed from him that we were missing earlier in the season because he just wasn't getting the touchdowns. And now he gets a matchup against Tampa Bay, allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. Monday Night Football, I don't know why we're getting Carolina at San Francisco. Did the schedule makers really look at this matchup before the season and say to ourselves, this is the best matchup for Monday Night Football. Let's put these guys on over Tampa Bay and the LA Rams. I just don't get it. But it is what it is. Rico Dowdle is still going to be a start for me this week, even though last week was not great and probably his worst performance of the season against an Atlanta team that has been giving up a ton of fantasy points as of recent. So this matchup against San Francisco is a solid matchup, but it's not great. But clearly, he is still the main running back. He added 7 targets in the passing game as well last week. I don't think Bryce Young is going to throw for as many yards this week as he did last week. Once again, they're going to have to run the football, and they're going to have to do it effectively. And for Christian McCaffrey, we're going to end the show on an easy one. Absolutely, he's a start. If you own him, he's the pillar of your offense right now, and hopefully this is another big game for him. Headliner Nation, there is every single matchup on the NFL slate this week, and I know I dozed off at the start of the show, and that dream was probably a lot more what we would like this season to be than what it has. But keep fighting. Even if your season is a nightmare, keep fighting. Hopefully you're still in the playoff picture, and maybe if you get a little bit of luck over the next couple of weeks, you can sneak into the fantasy playoffs. And if you're out of the playoffs already, be a spoiler. Keep setting that lineup and try to knock your friends out. So at least at the end of the season, you can say, hey, at least I kept you out of the playoffs. Doesn't matter what my team did all season long. Hit the like button, subscribe, bell notification, hype the video, comment below, interact with the video, send it out there to the masses so they see that the Fantasy Headliners are the best content on YouTube for fantasy football. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.